Wastelanders, Vault Dwellers, welcome back to the Fallout Lorecast. This is your host, Tom or Robots, and I am here again with my co-host, Lainey or Neos Pandora. Lainey, what's going on? How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good and doing well. We are recording this on a Saturday night because it's that time again. It is time for our patron chat of the month, and we've got a really cool topic. I believe it was Liberty Pie. Pie Man, who suggested this over the last month. We're going to be talking about the music of Fallout, and it's such a great topic. It's a very large topic. There are many games with many songs and soundtracks, so we're just going to see where this goes. And to introduce our patrons this week who have decided to join us, let's go through the list. We're going to go alphabetically. We have Girthan, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Welcome to the show. Yeah, you got to make sure you unmute before you talk.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, no, it's Girthon, but
Girthon,
no worries.
Yeah, Girthan Redmond, thanks for joining us. I'm excited to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, this is definitely a big topic for me. Out of all these games, my favorite thing was the music. I loved the old style music. It's the first time I'd ever really got into it and really kind of experienced this music in general.
Awesome.
Out of all games, this is the biggest game for me to pull me into the idea of the scores, the music being just such pivotal moments in the games. The intense power of, like, as soon as you finish Fallout 3 and you activate that water generator, that music score as you finally win, it's just so perfect for those moments. And
yeah.
I really liked how it went.
Yeah, I agree. It's got some really cool stuff. We'll dig into a little bit more of that in a little bit. We also have Liberty Pie, or Pie Man, who is now Liberty Pie. He has been the Liberty Prime of the show, our tier 6 patron for this last month. Liberty Pie, what's up? How's it going?
Doing wonderful.
Going wonderful. He's in his truck. He's working and guesting on a podcast at the same time. Brilliant.
And I'm going to eat some spaghetti at the same time, too.
And eating spaghetti. He is an efficient man. So welcome back to the show. It's good to see you. Then we have Nighttime Smith. Nighttime Smith, what's up? How's it going?
Oh, it's going great, guys. Glad to be back. One more show. Let's do this.
One more show. Let's do this. And then Top Chef Selly. Top Shelf Selly. I messed that up. Sorry,
it's
buddy.
All right. Glad to be here. And yeah, look forward to it.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. And
no problem.
There are some people who couldn't make it. So any of our patrons who couldn't make it today, you guys are still welcome to send in a recording with some of your thoughts about the music of Fallout. Of course, I'll tag that into a future episode or this episode if I get it soon enough. And let's jump into the topic. Girthan, you started this off with thoughts about both the score of the game and the music, the old 20th century 1930s through 1960s soundtrack that we get. And those are kind of the two main topics of the music. Which one would you guys like to discuss first? Girthan, let's start with you, because you kind of brought this up. Do you want to talk more soundtrack first, or do you want to talk more
for
score?
Me, really, the first thing I'd like to start with is the actual stylized music from the times that the game kind of originates from. I like the 50s, 40s, 30s styling music. It really kind of gave the game a lot of flair you really wouldn't expect from a video game, with using older music especially. You wouldn't see just the overall. Just trying to think of a word.
The aesthetic, the tone,
the overall
the feeling
aesthetic of it really gave it a feeling of, this is an old world attached to a lot of history, but you don't know any of it, and you don't really need to, as much as you will eventually. It
does create a question for a new player. So the first time you jump into that world, when you're running around and all of a sudden you pick up music that is vaguely familiar to you because you've probably heard maybe a song in an old cartoon or an old TV show or something like that, and yet it's in the game in this world that appears to be like futuristic wasteland. You know, like when you're new, you don't understand what year it is, what's happened yet. But then you hear this old music. It almost sounds contradictory. So it automatically raises a question, right? It's like, well, why is this the music that's being played?
And for the time of the music when it came out too, like it was a very prideful time for America, especially. Many of the songs coming out of it were very prideful of their country, of just all the things that they were doing, and you could see a very prideful country getting to this point where it's hard for them to survive. So the world gets destroyed because of all the pride within all the nations in the world in this video game, especially in this video game.
Right. And the 1950s, especially the post-World War II time period in the United States, is probably the most... that's the period in time where the United States really rose to world power, where we really reaped the benefits of being on the winning side of World War II, but then also being a kind of a support system for much of the rest of the world, being pro-capitalism, pro-democracy, all of these kinds of things, being a multicultural place where we were gaining benefits from the multicultural stuff, even when there were still, and there still is, difficulties between the cultures in the United States. But there was a lot that we were on the rise during that period. And like you're saying, we're playing a game where everything has fallen apart. So there is that kind of contrast too, right? That feeling of like, yeah, everything's going great, and yet nothing's going great because you're in the wasteland.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's very much a cause and effect type of an idea where the ideals of the time caused what we have to deal with now, and you can kind of feel that with the idea of the picking of the music that they chose, especially because Fallout 3 is where I started, so I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire is one of my favorite songs,
right? And
I love hearing it. It's it's so connected to the world, and it really, and like all the Atom songs about different Atom Bomb Baby, like that's such good songs for it. Like,
yeah. So fun fact, and this is something I don't talk about a lot. I've mentioned this before though. I've over the last 20 years since I was in college, learned how to swing dance. So doing dances like the Lindy Hop and the Charleston and these kinds of stylistic dances of the 20th century that were danced to swing jazz and then rock and roll and these kinds of songs, the kinds of songs that you have in Fallout. So not only did I learn how to dance, but I taught it locally. I've been an instructor just kind of on the side as mostly a fun thing, but a way to make a little bit extra money. And then also a DJ for a number of years. I've DJ'd a lot of this music. So it's always fun for me to pull songs that show up in Fallout and play them at dances for people. And at the regular like Sunday night dance that we have near where I live that I DJ'd for a number of years, oftentimes I would play I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire as like the last song of the night. And it always struck me as funny because it's from Fallout, and that's originally the way I heard it. I played that version of the song. There's multiple versions of these old popular tunes. But people would just kind of slow dance to it at the end of the night to kind of close out the night. But there's just something about it that was always just funny to me. Like, I don't want to set the world on fire. And I have to wonder if people were like, why does he play this song every night? Like, it's not typical of a swing dance to play that song, but I always thought it was funny. So it's just one of the things that I find humorous about using that music in the real world also. But why don't we open this up? Anybody else have any thoughts about the music, about this time period? Nighttime Smith.
Yeah, it was, I've had Atom Bomb Baby and Don't Set the World on Fire as my ringtone for when my wife would call me when we first started dating.
Was she your Atom Bomb Baby?
Yeah, at this point, yeah. With what Gerthon was saying, it is kind of interesting. There's almost this false dichotomy when you were first playing the game, because it's like, well, 2277 is kind of really just, or 2276 is kind of just a number when you start playing the game, and you start getting into it, and you realize, like, well, all the music's 1950s, and it's like, you're trying to figure out what was the feeling of the era compared to all the high techness. It's like that retro futurism. They look back. This is what the people in the 1950s thought the future would look like from our perspective. So there's a lot of like culturally important music that is showing some of the civil strife at the time, because all that music that they used during the game is stuff that was during the height of the Cold War, where people were really afraid.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah,
so
there is that too.
I wanted to add on.
You're right. There is like Atom Bomb Baby. There's a lot of they specifically pull a lot of songs that are references to Cold War stuff, atom bombs and the end of the world, and some of that strife does show up in the music for sure.
Radiation Baby, I think, is another one where it's he's talking about his high school sweetheart. She ran out to go get the class ring, and basically she came back and she was irradiated. And you play the joke like, oh well, she turned into a ghoul, but that's not what happened.
Yeah, or the song Uranium. That's another one.
Uranium Fever, I like that one. That's a country western song.
Yep. Yeah. It's interesting, and what's also interesting about these old songs is a lot of them have this like double entendre. They're often using metaphor. Music in general uses metaphor a lot, but either the metaphor is sexual or it's actually political, which is interesting because both of those things occur in the music. So,
what's the one from Fallout 76, Orange Colored Sky? Where I think it's kind of like a love song, but it's almost like he's talking about getting hit by a nuclear flash.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say it's Louis Armstrong, but I don't.
Yeah,
somebody with a deep voice like that.
Let's see. I've got it right here. Nat King Cole. And I was walking along minding my business when out of an orange-colored sky, flash bam, Alex Zam, wonderful, you came by. I was humming a tune, drinking in sunshine when out of that orange-colored sky. Yeah, the orange-colored sky, I think, is reference to like a sunset or something.
Yes,
but we know that
flash bam,
Alex Zam, like this could be a bomb, right? Yeah, that's pretty good. Anybody else have any thoughts on this? Who would like to go next? I know Lainey kind of had some thoughts. Okay, Pieman's raising his hand.
So my thing was, when I first played the game, I wasn't really into the era, I was more into that 80s rock, the metalheads and everything. And with the year being what it was at 20 something, you would think that they actually would go ahead, like
right.
The metal and AC/DC and all that. No, they just seem to lag behind our timeline and in music and everything.
Right. Yeah, I think that's one of the assumptions is that like if the games are 200 years in the future, why hasn't music progressed at all? And in a time of great strife, where society falls apart, there's very little time to make new music. Society doesn't progress, and so they hold on to those old songs. But but you're also right in that the world didn't fall apart until 2077. So
yeah, that's the year. Yeah.
Right. So one of the questions is like, why aren't they listening to music that would be still in the future for us? Like, why aren't they listening to at least somewhere that the music for us has moved in? Electronic music, heavier music, whereas they're listening to all this, what is already vintage music for us. By 2077, every song in the game is over 100 years old by that point.
Yeah.
So by the time you actually play Fallout 3 or Fallout 4, this music is now 300 years old. It would be like us walking around listening to music from before the Revolutionary War. Like that's...
So like a lot of classical music.
Mm-hmm. And like marching songs, stuff like that. Like that would be weird, but for some reason, society stopped progressing artistically, which is an interesting thing to think about. Like, why is that? Why now? Part of it is it's the aesthetic. It's the retrofuturism. Yeah. So you want to stick to that old music just to match the aesthetic. Lainey, you had a thought on that?
Well, you were kind of hinting at it before, this idea of there's a certain threshold where if a society is under enough stress, it cannot create art yet. And you see that when you look at the development of, like, I don't know, early societies. We look back at humans across history. They don't start creating things like art. They don't start writing. They don't do things like that until there's time for it, you know? And if the whole world's in peril, there isn't time. That's not the focus, you know?
Right. Yeah. Traditionally, art has been a thing done by the aristocracy because they have the time to do more than just work to get by. And until the rise of the middle class, you didn't really have a progress of general art and society until the rise of the middle class. And then that's one of the benefits of the 20th century, is that we finally got to a place where we could automate the production of food, where we had social structures, liberal social structures that gave people, even people who made like lower income, people who made base level income enough to get by, enough to, you know, pay for a place to live and food to eat, so that they had extra time. We had an education system that guaranteed that people could at least reach a certain level of society. It was the first time in the world, in Western society, that we'd had that. And so, especially in America, culture progresses faster during that 100 years than it had during any other period in time. What's interesting about this is if you study ancient Rome, you actually have one of the first counterculture, or at least documented counterculture events during the time of Julius Caesar, because society in Rome at that point, at least for the aristocracy, was, and kind of the middle class, there was kind of a burgeoning middle class at the time, was progressed enough, and people had enough time on their hands. The youth culture had enough time on their hands to actually think about these things and do these things. So one of the things like Julius Caesar was known for was wearing his toga as too loose. Like the hip hop style of saying, like, sagging your pants, like that was his equivalent of that during his time period, was to like sag his toga. And because he did that, the people that he was influencing, the younger people, started doing that as well. You actually had this counterculture fashion movement in ancient Rome 2,000 years ago. The next time you see anything like that is hundreds of years afterwards. It's crazy. But going back to music, there's a thing that happens with that. Once the youth culture is able to influence this, because it's based on middle classes, not based on and lower classes, not based on the aristocracy, then things kind of move in a different direction. You have, in the events of the music from Fallout, you have everything from early jazz through to like established rock and roll. And jazz was a counterculture movement. It was a music style that was brought about by the combination of European and African influences, and the reason it became popular was because in the 1920s and 1930s the youth culture was influential enough to grab hold to it. Like, parents would say things like, don't listen to that jazz, it'll ruin your mind, you know, like white parents especially. Rock and roll did the same thing. Like that, the rock and roll generation said, don't listen to, like the parents said, they were listening to jazz, but they did the same thing to their kids. Don't listen to rock and roll. It'll ruin your mind. Right. And then think about it. Time moves forward. And then you get like the 1970s, and then you get the 1980s and the 1990s. And every time there's a new style of music, the previous generation over the last 100 years pushed back against it because it represented this youth culture transition. And then all of a sudden that stops in the Fallout timeline, which I think goes to show that society no longer worked that way, that maybe things became too tough again for anybody to do anything outside of just survive, even before the time of the Great War. What do you guys think? I know that was a lot, but yeah, nighttime?
That makes sense. I mean, Josh Sawyer was talking about that when I watched him. He was doing a live stream, and he was saying that their cutoff point was the assassination of JFK, which would have been the explosion in counterculture. I mean, you had counterculture music already happening, but after 1960, I believe it was 1962, right?
I think JFK so. 62, 63. Yeah, we can look it up. Yeah.
Maybe it was 63. But after 63, you had the real counterculture from the baby boomer generation, where there was a complete
63, yeah.
Rebellion against, the sexual revolution. You had that complete rebellion of the ideals of the 1950s that a lot of kids were trying to be pushed into, because you had this post-war generation that had built this monetary empire, and they wanted to maintain it, and you can't really blame them, but it was just, kids gotta rebel, and something's gotta change every generation. Yep.
Yeah, you've got the rebellion of the original rock and roll generation. Then you have the counterculture rock and roll generation of the late 60s, early 70s. And then you have R&B and hip hop coming about in the 70s and 80s. Then you have you even have a third counterculture rock and roll thing with grunge music in the 1990s. And the development of gangster rap, which was a pushback against the previous forms of hip hop. And then, of course, you've got the 2000s and the 2010s, which we've more likely lived through. But you even have other, counterculture movements there. Things like, electronica and dubstep, when dubstep was new, right? And people were like, what is this? This is just noise. This isn't music, right? Like those kinds of sounds and things. But it was... Every generation has to define themselves, different from the previous generation. For years and years and years, culturally, people looked up to the older people in society because they were more established, they were more wealthy, they were more knowledgeable. But all of a sudden, with youth culture, age becomes something that you don't want. If you don't look 20-ish years old, then you look old. And there's like a different thing that happens with that. I wonder if this is even addressed in Fallout at all. Like this, I don't think there's really a mainline cultural movement in the games the same way that there is in society today, which would make sense because there wouldn't be like room for it, I don't think.
It's just the slate was wiped clean.
Yeah.
It's almost, you could argue, the only music that was left was, the music that was archived so far back that it survived the nuclear war.
Yeah, possibly. That's another point, is that all of that music was documented on hard recording surfaces, things like records, whereas digital music, and this is one of the fears people have moving forward, could easily be erased. If the internet breaks down, and hard drives don't last forever. I mean, you're lucky if the hard drive in your computer lasts you 10 years before it craps out, and then it's hard to get data off of it, right? Like, so if the internet falls apart and let's say society falls apart and time moves on, there's no hard storage of digital media. Like, it all could go away given enough time. So all of our culture today might actually disappear by something like 2277 or, whatever year you're in for a Fallout game in the future. That's an interesting concept, that like maybe there is music after that, but the world just doesn't have access to it anymore because it didn't survive.
Scary thought, huh?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. But then again, like, does it really matter? Like, if you're living in the 2200s, are you going to be happy listening to Ain't Misbehavin' and Orange Colored Sky, or would you rather be listening to, something from today? Like, are you going to be sad that you missed out on Britney Spears? Like would you even care? Like, Pie Man's like, nope.
If you've been to the Capital Wasteland, then probably not. Those people, they're hard. They're hard living, hard life. I don't think they have time to listen to music unless, you're pretty well set up.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Be listening to Three Dog every day in the Capital Wasteland.
Yeah, good old ow, Three Dog. Top Shelf, do you have any thoughts about this? We've been going on, but I want to make sure you get a chance to chime in. What do you think about the music of the era?
Yeah, I think it's really fitting kind of with what the vibe is, because I mean it all fits the aesthetic. Like, it's weird, it's 2077 and the cars look like they're from the 50s and the 60s, and everything kind of looks old school. And you were kind of talking about like, well, wouldn't have things progressed? maybe it's just a limitation of technology, because didn't they not invent the transistor or whatever?
Right.
So
Right.
all that stuff never got to get smaller. So if you don't have that technology to kind of spur that like shrinking of stuff, maybe it's just a matter of, oh, we can only improve on what we have. So maybe that type of music was popular for the whole time, and maybe they just improved on what they already had. So it could just be one of those things where it just translates to that time period because it still fits. It still fits with what they had going on. Like instead of like today where you have, you know, emo music and you have like death metal and all that sort of stuff, where it can kind of fit certain different aesthetics because the world has changed in so many different ways. Maybe back then, without that technology boost, they couldn't get guitars the same way. They couldn't adjust stuff like that. And so maybe it was just a limitation of the technology.
Yeah, potentially. Sure.
But I mean, yeah, I just think that the music really, really fits what they were going with in terms of the aesthetic of that universe. I started with Fallout 3, so I really vividly remember just kind of going into like the subway for the first time.
Uh-huh.
And I specifically love the score, not necessarily the popular music, but the score just kind of give you that creepy feeling. So that was,
yeah, it's very contrasty to the other music, right? The score,
it's extremely contrasting.
Yeah,
because you're in the subway and you're like, it genuinely scared me the first time I had a feral ghoul come out and attack me. It genuinely scared me. And then you go outside and you're facing a Deathclaw and you've got like Butcher Pete playing, and I'm like, oh, this is fun. This is no big deal. So I just I love how the music can change how you feel in one game specifically.
Yeah, I really like movies where the tone of the music contrasts with the events on screen. So, like Quentin Tarantino is a master at this. He'll have some scene where, like, you know, gangsters are gunning people down and people are dying, and then there'll be like this happy little tune playing in the background, you know. And Fallout does that too, because a lot of the time period music, it has a wholesome quality to it. We associate this like wholesomeness, right? There's no distorted guitars. There's no heavy beats. There's no drops. There's none of this stuff. You know, there's no rap. There's none of this stuff that we find edgier in this old style music. It's all traditional instruments. It's all traditional vocals and singing. And a lot of these songs, you know, were love songs, or they were like, you know, like good feeling songs about what's going on in the world. And to contrast that with, you know, fighting a Deathclaw or a ghoul chasing you down is funny. But then you bring up this idea of the soundtrack, which has always been ominous. The Fallout 1 soundtrack is great. Like, if you guys have not looked that up, go look up the soundtrack to Fallout 1, just the environmental music and when you meet the Brotherhood, there's this like kind of like undertone of just like this rotting vibe underneath the game, and that contrasting to this like wholesome quality music is really, it really does create a tension that doesn't really resolve.
Yeah.
When I go to sleep at night, sometimes I'll do that. I'll put on the Fallout 1 soundtrack and just let my mind go where it goes.
That sounds really dark. Do you end up with like spooky dreams from that? Like, what happens?
I'll wake up occasionally and be like, man, that was man, I felt like I was in a fist fight for 8 hours.
Yeah, it's tense. Like, it's the kind of thing that like I can imagine if you had that on loop, you'd be like tense the whole time you're sleeping. Like, your muscles are just kind of like ready. He's training. That's working out while you sleep is what that is.
Yeah, and you were talking about that contrast. One that sticks out specifically in my mind is Fallout 3 Tranquility Lane.
Uh-huh.
That looping soundtrack, it's like very jaunty and like really peaceful, and then you like understand what's going on, and you're like, oh, that's dark.
Yeah.
What's going on there? I'm like, that you have this little kid that is actually a grown adult being like, yeah, just murder people for fun.
Right. And it's everybody like, there is basically in hell. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like, like this wonderful little piano. I'm like, that's disturbing.
Yep. I love the contrast in that. Like, if I were to make my own movie, I would have contrasting music all over the place. There's something about that that's just maybe it gives you a sense of self-awareness, if that makes sense. Like, it either, like, contrasting music either happens because it's a mistake, because like a film director or a game designer didn't choose the right music accidentally, or they did it on purpose, right? And it's like breaking the rules of art on purpose. If you understand the art well enough, then you can start breaking the rules in smart ways, and it lets you know that you're actually being guided by something smarter with more intentionality than you maybe would have assumed it initially.
It's also very psychologically jarring, because your brain is telling you that you're doing this, but you hear something that your brain is also telling you is the completely opposite emotion that of what you're doing.
Right.
Yeah, it's that self-awareness, I think. Like you were saying, Tom, it's like either it's done really well where it's self-aware and it kind of intentionally pulls you out of the moment to make you go, oh, this is what I'm doing. Like Tranquility Lane, when you realize what you're doing, it kind of pulls you out and you're like, oh, I'm killing people because this guy gets some sort of sadistic fun out of it. Meanwhile, you have something like the only one that came to mind is like Halo, when you're like running away from everything and you've got this intense music and it's like keeping you in that moment. You think it's really intense, but that's because it's not trying to pull you out of the moment. But that like split is so self-aware that it makes you realize what you're doing is the opposite of what you're listening to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pie Man. He's got something to chime in with.
I do. So, with the only example that I could come to mind through all this was Fallout 4, when you finally get to the Brotherhood airship comes in, you know, like all the big fanfare and everything.
Yeah, the
that makes you.
Yeah.
Yeah, when they come in, it's like, oh, big bad, or like they got stuck.
Yeah, the music for
dramatic.
that is very dramatic. Yeah, that is a dramatic sequence, and the first time you've seen something like that in the skies of Fallout. Like, yeah, we've seen vertibirds and things, but that thing's huge. And the first time you see that, you're like, oh, that's a thing I did not expect. And the music is exactly on tone in that it lets you know, hey, this is a big deal. It's not contradictory at all, which is like, and I think that's one of the things about the sound design of these games is that it does that well. It, you know, when things are right on with the soundtrack, they're right on with the soundtrack really, really well. And when they're contradictory with the songs, you know, from the old time period, then they do that really well too. And it's there's none of that like middle ground where it's just not done well. Both sides of that, both extremes are solid. So I have some of the titles of the ambient like background music here, and I think this will kind of back up some of it because, of course, you have like the music from the game, you know, these old songs, Easy Living, Civilization, Crazy He Calls Me, Butcher Pete, a wonderful guy, and I'm specifically looking at just Fallout 3. But then you look at the actual game background music, the ambient music, and the main title, New World, New Order. This is just in order of the soundtrack. Lockstep, Price of Honor, Fortress, Unwelcome Guest, Ambush, Never Surrender, Metal on Metal, Behemoth. Like, these are the names of these tracks, and they're like, the tone is completely different than, you know, like, I don't want to set the world on fire, you know, like, it's just you know, City of Ruin, Wandering the Wastes, Ashes and Sand, What Remains, Place of Refuge, The Smallest Hope, you know, like, it's completely that other direction, which is great. I just love that. So do you guys, when you're playing the game, and I think everybody approaches the music differently when they're actually in the game, like, and this is my example, let me know how you do it. Most of the time, although I love the music a lot, when I first started playing the game and I first started realizing that things like ghouls just come running at you from nowhere and you're like, I'm going to die. If there are games that I need to be aware of my environment, I will often turn down the environmental music so I can hear the environment better. I don't remove it. I just drop the volume of it. And then if I'm out in the world, I don't play radio because I want to make sure that I'm aware of what's going on. So when I do hear songs, it's because I walked into a building and the songs were playing on the radio, or I walked into a situation where there's like a radio nearby, or, the game is playing it on purpose because of something that's going on. But I know a lot of people will keep the soundtrack all the way up, or they will specifically listen to a radio station while they're running around killing things because they're not so worried about the environment as much as they are just enjoying the tone of the music. How do you guys approach that? Pieman?
Or you're like me and you just mod the radio to your liking.
Oh, do you?
Because I do on Fallout 4. I do. I did do it vanilla version for it, just to say I beat everything, vanilla.
Uh-huh.
But no, I couldn't handle the radio. I am an intense person when I play these Fallout games, when I'm all that. But yeah, normally I do turn down the ambient noise because it just gets spooky because I always wear headphones.
Yeah.
I wear headphones where it's like, what's going on over there?
Yeah.
What's going on over there?
Yeah. No, I totally get you. So you specifically choose the music you want to put into the game. So you pick like your favorite songs and then you mod them into the game.
Mostly by other modders. Like right now I have a what is it? It's called the Road Trip Radio, where it's where I think it's sort of separate than the other natural radio stations, but it has like the songs that we have for today, like the 80s rock, basically stuff that's total contradictory to Fallout and what they're trying to do.
Got it. Okay. Who else wants to chime in? Nighttime, what do you do?
When I first played the game, I didn't really know that you could do that. You could take out a lot of the environmental music, and then I did. And I think I probably played 2 or 3 years without any type of ambient music whatsoever. And it wasn't until I started seeing some of the stuff popping up on YouTube, I'm like, man, I'm really missing a large portion of the game. So I cranked up the ambient music, and I've been doing that for 3 or 4 years now, and it really does make a difference. I mean, it puts you in a completely different emotional mood when you're playing, and it really does heighten your senses a little bit. But I mean, there's some of them, like the Fallout ones, I think are a little bit, Fallout 4 specifically, some of it is a little bit over the top, especially when you find a new not a settlement, but a new location. Uh-huh. It's that emotional lifting music. But if you listen to some of the ambient music from Fallout New Vegas, some of it is really, really dark, and it's not emotionally jarring, but it kind of hits you. It's like, okay, I feel like I'm actually in danger. I kind of feel like I don't know how to describe it. It's a little bit more, you know what I mean? It starts eating at the back of your brain. You really do feel like stressful. You're in a life and death struggle. Yeah, that makes sense. Lainey, I don't play with the radio. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and so no radio. You just kind of only hear the radio songs when you're in certain spots.
I mean, sometimes, but it's like if you're in Fallout New Vegas, I mean, don't do it because it's like out of nowhere you just get cut in half with a death claw, and then
right.
Yeah, I mean, Fallout 3, you kind of can, but like I started playing that, and you go out around the outside of the map, and it's just Yao Guai and Deathclaw all over the place. Fallout 76, it's not that bad. I mean, you can blast the radio, and you don't really have to pay attention to what's going on because everything's so buffed. But yeah, that's pretty much it. But if I want to listen to music, I just listen to it at work or right before I go to bed or something on the phone. I don't do it in the game.
Interesting. Who else wants to chime in? Yeah, go ahead and jump in, Top Shelf.
So, yeah, I actually kind of researched this just on the background of Enon Zur, and what you were saying with like the ambient music. I typically play, especially my first 1 or 2 playthroughs, with all the ambient music on, because like you were saying, is you can be playing and all of a sudden a death claw pops up and it will scare the crap out of you even harder than if the death claw just popped up.
Right.
The other thing I'll notice is if they sneak up on you, it won't trigger anything. There have been a number of times where I've been hit from behind by like a feral ghoul out of nowhere, and there's no change in the ambient music or whatever.
Yeah.
It's only until it actually hits you.
Yep. That, oh no, an enemy is nearby sound doesn't play.
Yeah, and then you quickly pause and try to breathe because your heart's now in your throat. No, it's just Enon Zur did a very good job with Fallout. He started with Tactics, which I've never played, but I mean, Fallout 3 kind of was a reboot of the franchise, and that music set the stage. Since he's done every other one, it set the stage for the music in Fallout 4, which has won awards, Fallout New Vegas, which is fantastic, and 76, which I know has been nominated before and talked really highly. All that ambient music does a very good job of putting you in the atmosphere, whether you're walking through, you know, the Washington Monument and you've got a behemoth, you know, in the main area, or you're sneaking around and a Yaogwai is near you, or if you're just in the middle of Rivet City and you're just trading and stuff like that. It really meshes well, and I will always play with it on for my first 2 to 3 playthroughs, and I will very rarely listen to the actual radio, just because I feel like the ambient music does enough of a job putting me in the mood than the regular radio.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. It's always interesting to me how people approach games differently, especially when there's options like this that you can tweak. I find it kind of a cool thing. Anyone else want to chime in about this? Any other thoughts, Lainey?
I haven't really talked much at all. So I guess I'll also summarize kind of, I don't know, my opinions on the music too. I love the music in Fallout, the score and the added music. And for me, it's a big nostalgia thing, because both I started playing Fallout when I was pretty young and because of the dancing, right? And so it's a combination of, like, when I started playing Fallout, I was already familiar with some of the music because of my dad, obviously. And so to me, when I play it now and I hear the music, it like gives me a sense of nostalgia that probably the game wants you to have, right? It's better if you have that, and I feel it very emotionally, right? Because it is also nostalgic for me outside of the game. Also, when I play, I have always played with the ambient sound turned on, right? And I never wanted to use the radio, even though I like the songs, because of the same reason. Like, I wanted to have the ambient sound, and I wanted to have, I wanted to experience it fully, but I didn't want to be distracted. But in Fallout 4, when they introduce all the things you can do with your settlements, I would spend hours, working on settlements and just letting the radio go over and over and over and over, right? Until you've heard the same songs 10 times and you've built maybe 2 buildings and, like, you call it a day, right? Like, but it's fun. And so I really love them, and I love incorporating them in ways that I can. And 76 is so interesting because, as you guys were saying before, it's not as scary an experience. You can be distracted and you're not going to get your ass kicked immediately, which is awesome. So it gives you a space to kind of, like, if you just want to walk around the wasteland and listen to some tunes and, like, kick back, you can, and that's really nice. You get to kind of enjoy it differently than you might in other games. Yeah, it is different, and each game does play out a little bit differently. Like New Vegas is very dangerous if you just go north, right? You're supposed to follow the quest line down and around the map. Whereas 76, they've kind of balanced it now so that if you are actually getting, perks and building yourself into a build, if you're increasing, your percentage damage with certain types of weapons and then using those weapons, the game isn't particularly difficult. But if you don't, it's actually very hard. Or if you're not playing with other people and you don't make yourself a build, it's actually very hard. And some people don't do that. Some people focus on perks that don't really
add to their combat, and they find the game very difficult. So I would have to wonder, people who play that way, what their experience is with the music, and do they keep the sound effects down and things in order to hear the environment more. I know I go back and forth. Sometimes I want the music to cue me in on things, but sometimes I feel, and I think it depends on how well music does this, but I don't ever want to feel manipulated. I don't ever want to feel like I'm being told to have a feeling for something that doesn't happen naturally, if that makes sense. So in some games I will completely turn the music off because I just want, because the sound effects are just so good that all I want to do is hear the environment and the sounds and things, and I don't really want the music or the background music or whatever. But I go back and forth with it. Any other thoughts on this? Anybody else want to chime in or have anything else to add? No. One of the things that I think about a lot with these games is it would be really cool if every new game included every song from the previous games. Now I know that costs more for licensing and things like that, but there's part of, in the back of my mind, I'm like, can't they just keep adding to the soundtrack? Because like Lainey mentioned, they will loop. Like if you just listen to radio enough, there's not hundreds of songs. And even if there were, eventually those would loop too, right? But there came a point in New Vegas where I just didn't want to hear Kick in the Head again. I was just like, I cannot listen to that song again.
Most people complain about Johnny Guitar because they put it in twice.
Yeah.
Because apparently there was some other song that was supposed to be in there that they removed.
And so it fills 2 slots, so it gets played twice as much. Yeah. There's certain songs that I'm just like, I've heard this too many times. But then again, that's me. Like some people really like the repetition of hearing a song they like over and over and over again. So that becomes a benefit for people of different thoughts. So any other thoughts on the music? I feel like we've done a pretty good job talking through all of this. I'm interested to see what Aperture is going to send in his recording, and maybe some other people might if they missed this episode. Yeah, Nighttime?
I got one. It is kind of cool. A lot of, I don't know if you might have this, but this is the music that my grandfather listened to when he was a kid. Mm-hmm. And what's kind of weird is that he didn't play this stuff around the house, but I come back a couple years ago and I'm like, hey, let me put on some music, and he knows all the lyrics to a lot of these songs from New Vegas, especially all the country western songs. And it was it was really, really cool that you would have this stuff that you get such an emotional enjoyment out of, and then you're like, oh, well, also my grandfather really likes these songs, and not only does he really like them, but he got to hear them when they first came out. Yeah. And to hear him say "Big Iron," and he started talking about it was a trip, man. It's that type of connection that maybe not everybody has, but if you do have that connection, it makes the Fallout universe a little bit more interesting, a little bit more personal.
When I teach classes on dancing or on music for dancers, especially this old music, because it sounds so old, I find that for me and for a lot of other people I've noticed, we get this picture of, it makes us think of our grandparents or our great grandparents, and it gives us this picture in our heads of like old people playing music. Because like if you went to an event today of some of the musicians who were around during that era, you're going to see, the band's going to be full of, white haired and bald people playing the music at 70, 80 years old, and they've been playing most of their life, so they're good musicians, but they're not playing with the energy of youth, right? And that's kind of the thought you get. Like you hear something like Jumping at the Woodside, and you think to yourself, oh, this sounds like a bunch of old people playing music. But here's my recommendation. If any of you guys are interested in doing this, try to get past the sound quality. Like notice that these things were recorded using technology that we don't have now, but turn it up in your headphones or on your stereo. Put on something like Jumping at the Woodside and turn it up really loud, as if you were at a concert where somebody was playing this live. And imagine in your head 20 and 30 somethings, not 70 and 80 year olds, 20 and 30 somethings, and maybe even teenagers. Some of these musicians at the time were in their late teens when they joined these bands, and playing this song with the energy of youth. Like the energy that like pop artists today put into their music, and picture that in your mind while listening to these songs really loud. And you'll start to understand how maybe your grandparents felt when they listened to it and how the music was actually performed. Because those songs that are really rockin' or really swinging are like, some of those tracks are legit. Like, these people are tearing it up, and they're tearing it up in a way that nobody ever did before they did it, in a way that's just freaking awesome. And if you could put yourself in the shoes of your grandparents listening to that, you might be able to understand why they were excited to hear this music, because it does for them what music does for us now. It's just harder to see it through the veil of time and through the low quality of the recordings, but it's there. These were not recorded and written by 70-year-olds, I promise you. And it gives you kind of a new respect for the music, especially songs by, if you want more music like this, I can make recommendations. Like, go look up music by Artie Shaw, or I think Artie Shaw's band is actually one of the most interesting. Look up Count Basie. Look up these old swing artists. Look up old rock and roll artists. The kinds of people doing music in Fallout. Look up those lists and then find the musicians and look for the other music that they do, and then go down the list. Don't just pick like the popular tracks that are like the love song that everybody plays at like weddings. That's fine, but go down the popular list and find the deep tracks, the stuff. And this is true for almost every musician. There's the songs that they know people will like and people are going to pay for and are going to help keep them in business. They're going to help make them money. And then there's the deep cuts that's the stuff that they want to play. And you're going to find that for every one of these artists. And some of those deep cuts are just like the solid music. Nighttime?
Like when it came to Marty Robbins, Gunfighter Ballads and Trail Songs and Gunfighter Ballads, I think is the name of the album. Big Iron was not the popular song when it came out. It was, I believe, El Paso. Mm-hmm. Was the popular song at the time. And that's what was really interesting. My grandfather thought it was cool. But there's a lot of those deep cuts that you're talking about that were not popular at the time and then gained popularity, later in the years. Yeah,
because a lot of them are actually the better music. They're actually the better songs. They're the ones that actually have more musicianship, or there's more energy behind them because the band just liked them more. They weren't the ones that just talked about like falling in love, because those are easy pop songs to put on the radio. Everybody wants a good love song. Like, that's great. But the song that was like designed just for, people to dance to and doesn't even have lyrics, some of those have some of the best musicianship from people. Think about it. Like, we live in a post-guitar era, right? Like, guitar music isn't at its height anymore. But some of these bands were some of the most influential guitar players of their time who did things on guitars that nobody ever did before. Like take the perspective on that. And then you can do the same thing with many other instruments. It's a really cool topic. And I hope that because people like the music of the Fallout games and they gain a perspective on some of this old music, that they can actually see a little bit more into it too, because they are such a wealth of information, and fewer and fewer of the people who are behind this music are still around. It's that old that many of them just aren't even with us anymore, and they can't tell us the stories of what it was actually like back then. Pie Man?
Or you be like my sister and actually have the hard copies for the record player.
Yeah, listening to these on record players would be really cool. If you've got a system where you can do that, you're going to hear things that you didn't hear.
Like, legit, she has the original from way back when.
Yeah.
And it still plays, and it's so weird listening to it because of all the crackling and all the stuff that they just couldn't drown out because of the technology they're using back then.
Yeah, you can digitally edit it out. The other thing that's interesting about that music is that with modern music over the last 30 years, compression has gotten higher and higher and higher and higher. And what that means is that quiet sounds and loud sounds all get kind of squashed. And the loud sounds come down and the quiet sounds come up. So everything is competing at the same level. So when things get quiet, it's louder. And when things get loud, it's quieter. And so any music you listen to today, digitally created music, will be highly, highly compressed. if you go back and listen to these songs, there is quiet stuff in there that when you turn up your stereo really loud, you start to hear, because the music isn't overly compressed. So, for example, what's the name? There's a pianist. I'm not going to remember his name right now. I'll have to come up with it later. Who plays some popular songs from back in the day. But he was a great piano player, and he would always hum while he played. And even though many of the songs didn't actually have a vocal line in them, if you turn them up enough, you can hear the melody that he was humming, which doesn't happen in any of the instruments, in the background being picked up by the microphone that was used like on the piano or on the drum set or whatever. And that's in the mix. It's there. It's just not originally part of it, but in the artist's mind, that was part of the music. It just wasn't recorded the same way the other instruments were, because it wasn't meant to be hummed in it. But for some reason, when he would play his piano parts, he heard something else happening in the music that never got actually put down as a musical part of the song, which is super weird to me, but like really cool. It's like really, really cool. Or like these large ensembles with like, many, many different instruments in the bands. You'll hear each of the individual pieces, each of the individual instruments, and some of them are louder and quieter because they were further from the microphone. But there might be
big band.
Yeah, the big band stuff.
Big band music on vinyl is something completely different to listen to.
It's amazing. Like every band had a guitarist, but you don't think of a guitar player being in a big band. But if you turn it up enough, you'll hear the in the background where the guitar player was playing, which was very important for the band, because the rhythm section for a big band is the drums, the guitar, and the double bass. And those were typically in the back of the band, and they were there to keep the rest of the band on track. And of course, in a microphoned setup, the horns were way louder than the guitar, because the guitar wasn't amplified like it is today. But you turn up that recording and you can really start to hear the thum, 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 and the of the guitar in the background. And those players were awesome. They did really, really cool stuff with those parts, but you're not going to hear it unless you really turn it up. So it's just cool to explore this stuff in lots of different ways is my point. So there's more to it than you would guess. Yeah. Nighttime?
Why do you think a lot of the music that happened, the big band music has kind of gone away, and it's only really used for like television? Because we always see big bands nowadays on like late night shows. Do you think that
I know the answer to this. Traditionally, jazz was incorporated with it came about in popularity with television becoming a thing, and jazz traditionally was connected to television in a very fundamental way. So even as new music came about and became more popular, things like rock and roll and hip hop and those kinds of things, there was this association with jazz and television always in the background. So you ended up with the late shows, which traditionally had these jazz bands, and move forward with jazz bands. Even on shows that are modern, the bands that play behind the music are generally very talented musicians who can play pretty much anything. They're not just, like a rock band. Like I think about like the Roots, who play with what's his face? What's his name?
Jimmy Fallon.
Jimmy Fallon. I was going to say Jimmy Kimmel, and I was like, that's not it. It's another Jimmy Fallon. Those guys, you give them anything and they can play anything. Now they clearly have a preference for what, they like, but they're very, very talented. But yeah, it has to do with the connection of jazz to that music. Now, why is big band less popular and harder to do? Well, it's harder to pay for all of those musicians. You don't need that many musicians today.
Yeah. Well, rock is very popular. It's very easy to start a rock band. You get a few guys, everybody gets, their certain instrument, and you get them together, and instead you have 4 guys instead of like 10 or 15.
There was even a tax that was put on bands in the late 40s, I believe, which made it
New York.
I don't remember the specific details of it. It may have been in New York, but it was the reason why you had these small combos start showing up more often, and why large touring bands no longer had 16 members in their bands. They only really could afford, say, like sets and groups of like 4s and 5s. And it was based on some sort of tax that came about. And it was one of the reasons why swing music declined and small combo music and jazz grew, and then of course also rock and roll and country, because you could do that with 4 or 5 members in your band.
Yeah, if you look at the Ink Spots, the Ink Spots was a huge band, and then you get into the later years where you get BB King and all these other people, and they're like almost solo acts. They do have supporters behind them, but they're known as this individual person.
Right, and record labels understood the power of a famous individual to head something up, so it was easier to promote Frank Sinatra as Frank Sinatra with whatever backup band he happened to have at the time than it was to promote the backup band. And even groups like, Count Basie, like there's a very popular performance of Frank Sinatra at the Sands with Count Basie as the backup band, which is phenomenal because Count Basie's band was amazing, and they toured well into the 60s, but Basie was the name. And unless you were a really interested in the music, you weren't necessarily aware of like who was the lead saxophone player and who was the lead trumpet player, and like all of that stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of details that went into it, but mostly it was a cost thing. You could promote an individual or a group of like 4 people, and you can make way more money and spend less on the band and tours and those kinds of things, because you didn't need that many people.
If you could go back in time to like a musical era, where would you go?
Oh, there's that's a good question. There's a lot of places that would be really interesting to see. What do you guys think? Why don't we wrap up with this question, because that's a really great question. Yeah. Who has a thought? Where would you go if you could go back to and think about it like this, maybe even like to a concert? Like if you could see a musical act live, like at their peak, where would you go? Or who would you see in roughly what year? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, top shelf.
Okay, so this is one that I kind of feel bad because I actually had an opportunity and I just kind of passed it up. But Linkin Park in the mid to late 2000s. When I was living in Florida, they had a concert in Miami. Sorry, my dog is going ballistic.
That's fine.
And so I would love to go back and see them, because Chester Bennington, now as an adult, I'm just like, that guy could do things that not many people can do.
Yeah, they were very talented. Yeah.
So yeah, I would go back and see like Linkin Park and some of the bands around that time. So
okay, cool. Gerthon?
For me, honestly, I would definitely go back to the golden age of metal, when hair metal was a big thing, and like seeing Twisted Sister and all that type of stuff going on.
Yeah,
I love it.
That would have been crazy, I'm sure. That was a crazy time. Yeah, huge stadium rock, right?
Yeah. So that just the powerful sets, those crazy shows, just being as glamorous as possible. I love it. I do honestly love it. Yeah,
Lupus in chat says Queen live at Wembley Stadium. Yeah, that would be cool too. Yeah, there's so many you could name. Who else has any thoughts? Laney, Pie Man?
First, I'd want to say I'd want to go see Twisted Sister also.
Okay.
I love their music. I listen to it like while I'm going down the road.
Yeah.
But seriously, besides that, my second choice would probably be either AC/DC when they're touring, like during their golden years, or Metallica.
Mm-hmm.
One of those big O.
Yeah, a lot of rock fans out here. Lainey, what do you think? I know you've got a diverse interest in music.
I want to be the sound tech for Nirvana's MTV Unplugged performance.
Yeah, that would be cool. Yeah, like Nirvana is one of the bands that, like, one of the reasons I even got into playing guitar, because I was of that generation. You know, like I was 13? No, I was 15 when Kurt Cobain died. So I was like right at the right age to be like hit by that, you know, like, oh my God. And then like be like super into the music. So yeah, I would really love to see like, I don't know, a huge Nirvana concert in like 1993, because I never got the chance to do that. I ended up seeing bands like Bush and the Toadies and stuff like that when they came through. I saw some of those kinds of bands live.
You saw the Toadies?
I saw the Toadies multiple times. The Toadies and Bush, the Toadies, and Hum. And Hum was one of my favorite bands in the 90s. I don't know if anybody remembers Hum, but Hum was, their sound was huge, like knock you over. Like the guitars were just like just like wall of sound huge. They just sounded so big. But I would choose, I mean, if we're talking like time period of like the music from Fallout, there was an event that happened in 1937, 39, where who was it? Oh God, I'm trying to remember now. Anyway, there was an event that happened. There was a time period that happened in New York when like 3 or 4 of the big swing bands were all in the city in the same weekend. And to be able to, and they would have battles of the bands. And so you could even see, Chick Webb versus Glenn Miller, I think was one of them. And then you could go down the street the next night and see Basie and somebody else. And maybe even Lionel Hampton was in town or something like that. There was like this weekend in the late 1930s, where you could have gone to see all of those acts in New York City in the same weekend, which would have been really, really cool. But if we're talking like more recent, then yeah, seeing certain Nirvana would have been really, really cool. I don't know, or even to go back to like the late 60s and to see something like or early 70s and see somebody like Led Zeppelin at their height, because I bet they sounded freaking huge. Like I bet they played something like Stairway and it would just sounded like delicate and loud, but like delicate, and all of a sudden by the end it was just like, it was just heavy. Or they'd launch into what's the song, and I bet that just like
Immigrant Song.
Yeah, Immigrant Song. I bet that song just like echoed in venues, just like shook the foundations of venues. And I bet they sounded a lot better live than they did on any of the recordings, even though the recordings sound good. Nighttime?
I'm going to shoot all the way back to the past, and it's one of the reasons why I like Fallout 4. I would probably want to go back into the 1770s and experience some of the war music, the writing and the culture behind a lot of the music that they would play, not just on the battlefield, but in the taverns and stuff, at recruitment places, and experience what that colonial Minutemen lifestyle was, and the passion and the muster of a lot of those men that did that. Yeah,
that would be a very different thing than what we experience today.
It's listen to the Enclave radio from Fallout 3. That's a lot of the music that they play is some of the stuff that was created during the American Revolution.
Right, but to experience that in the actual time of it, with people at pubs or on the battlefield or wherever, would be interesting. Yeah, for sure. Mad Val in chat says Led Zeppelin is my favorite band. Dazed and Confused, my favorite music. All right, guys. Well, this has been super fun. Thanks for joining me, and as always, a pleasure to chat with all of you. Thank you also for supporting the show. Thank you to all of the patrons, you guys, and everyone else. Lainey and I do appreciate it. You are why we're able to continue doing this, and we really, really do appreciate it. So thank you for being here with us. I hope you guys decide to join us next month. We'll figure out what our topic is over the next few weeks. And anybody else who wants to join us, check out the patreon.com/Fallout Lorecast, and help support the show. Check out all the cool stuff you can get. And Fallout 76 nighttime shirt. Very cool. Let's go back through, and if you have something you want to shout out, like some project you're working on, you want to share, or ways that people can get a hold of you, go ahead and let them know. We're going to go backwards through the list. So we'll start with Top Shelf. Top Shelf?
All right. So I'm kind of working on Twitter because right now all I've got is my my private stuff, and I don't really feel like putting that out there. The best way to reach me is the Discord on here. And then once I have a Twitter, I will let you guys know.
Sounds good. All right. Nighttime Smith.
Maybe if you guys can drag me onto Fallout 76, I might be able to start playing with some people. But I'm trying to go through a Legion playthrough for Fallout New Vegas with a lot of the lost content. So give me a little bit. I'll be there eventually, maybe.
Okay, cool. Liberty Pie.
So I just started playing Fallout New Vegas. Haven't been really able to get into it since I have a full-time job. Going everywhere.
Yeah.
If you want to search me up, don't really do much on my socials because I don't really go on there anymore.
But you're on the Discord a lot.
You can find me.
Yeah.
I am on the Discord a lot. I'd also like to shout out Modus Files, like I did last month. The Rocket Club. Still great group of people. Great story ever. I'm trying to think what else. Oh yeah, for my Fallout New Vegas, you know how Nighttime is doing a Legion playthrough. I'm just trying to be a cowboy, you know.
Right.
Cowboy, lone gunslinger sort of thing, you know. Don't give two crap. Mm-hmm.
Nice.
So yeah. Also, if I ever do like a quote, please don't bring logic into it. I mean, like seriously.
On Discord, yeah, because he's just playing the role of Liberty Prime. So yeah, like sometimes he'll pop in and say democracy is non-negotiable, and then people will start debating the statement, and he's just like, I'm just playing a role, guys. Like, I didn't want to talk about. Come on. But yeah. Also, I should be. No, I probably shouldn't say that. No. Okay.
I don't like gloating a lot.
Well, here, I'll gloat for you. Liberty Pie has supported 3 of our podcasts at all very high tiers, and Liberty Pie Man, it's very, very appreciated. Thank you very much. And obviously you don't have to do this again next month, but if you chose to do it again, we would, Lainey and I would be very, very appreciative. And if not, thank you for your support for this last month and previous months, and for just being here. We really do appreciate it. You're an awesome part of the community, and you know, we couldn't do it without you. So thank you very much.
I'll still be Liberty Prime. Don't get me wrong about that. I'll still be Liberty Prime.
Awesome. Well, thank you very, very, very much. Girthon, how can people get a hold of you? And is there anything else you want to shout out?
Getting a hold of me is honestly just on Discord right now. I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, anything like that. So if anybody's interested in playing games, hit me up on here. I'll play anytime, any group, any game. I don't care what it is. But other than that, I play Xbox, and if anybody wants to, just get me on here too, and I'll add you guys on Xbox. But other than that, that's all I have.
Awesome. Yeah, a few times people have tried to set up some D&D games over Discord. And it gets close to going, and then somebody has something come up and they can't do it. So you're welcome to go try and put something together if people want to join you.
I actually got a game going with you guys because of this network. I wouldn't have, honestly, I've been trying to get a game to be very stable, and these are the first group I've ever had that's been very stable.
Oh, that's awesome.
This community really gave me a good thing to do all the time.
That's great. I'm happy to hear it. And feel free to use the Discord for chatting. I think if people see you guys in a channel regularly, like if you want your own weekly D&D voice channel, I can set that up for you, because I think if people see you in there more, it'll create more questions and thoughts for people to be like, oh, I want to be in a game. So maybe you could set up a second game, or maybe they'll be inspired to set up their own game. So I'm happy to facilitate whatever you need on here. Lainey, second to last but not least.
Hello. All right, where can you find me? I am Neos Pandora on Twitch, on Twitter, on YouTube. Pretty much anywhere. You can find me there. On Discord. Let's have a little chat.
Let's talk about cats.
I mean, if you want to. I'm always accepting cat photos. I mean, it's the internet. Like, please.
Anything cool going on? Anything you want to share? Any projects you're working on?
Cool going on. I mean, I just started that job 2 weeks ago, a week ago. So, I mean, that's been going good. It's been cool. I don't know. There's just something. I sold someone Fallout 4, and I like convinced them to buy it. And I was so proud.
That's great. That's great.
But, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, good. I'm glad you're enjoying your job. For people who who don't know yet, she's working at a little mom and pop video game store where they like buy and sell and trade games and stuff.
Yeah.
So she's got a whole bunch of games like under her fingertips for like all sorts of different consoles and generations of stuff. So that's super fun. Well, good. I'm glad that's going well. I have the same stuff I've got going on regularly, except a little bit new stuff as well. Of course, there's the Robots Radio Rocket Club. So if you're interested in launching your own podcast and want to be associated with the network, want some help and guidance on how to get your show going and make it the absolute best it can be with an audience and all of that, then check out the robotsradio.net website. There's a link on there for the Rocket Club. And other than that, I have got a new thing I've been doing every day during the week, during weekdays in the middle of the day. So it's noon Eastern my time. I am doing what is called the Robots Radio Show. This is a podcast. It's also a daily live stream. And at the beginning of it, it's about 15-20 minutes of me just going through the most recent news for the day about video games. So I'll be talking about Fallout updates. I'll be talking about Elder Scrolls. I'll be talking about, anything else that's big and, potentially something you guys might be interested in. I will highlight it. I'll give you a quick little download of what's happening with the news. And then after that, any of the hosts on Robots Radio or Rocket Club hosts are welcome to join me. So they can pop in and we'll be talking about some of the news items. We'll be talking about other things that are coming out. On Friday, we had this awesome conversation about the new update coming to Fallout 76 and some of our thoughts about, the character builds, slots, and all sorts of things. So the streams will usually go for like an hour and a half, 2 hours. The first part is the podcast part right now that shows up as a quick daily download for news. And again, you can find that everywhere right now. The Robots Radio Show is the best way to look it up on whatever podcatcher you're using if you want to just get a quick little download every day of what's going on. But we'd love to have you join us live. And this show is going to continue to evolve, but it's a way for me to do something daily and be kind of connected to you guys and talk about stuff. So I hope you check it out. Other than that, I think that's it. That's it for today's show. Thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you for being here, and we will be back. Lainey and I will be back next Thursday coming up for our regular time, 2 p.m. in the afternoon Eastern. So come join us for that live at twitch.tv/robotsradio. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks for being here, everybody. Have a good night. To plug into everything else we're doing, check out robotsradio.net. Also, look up the Robots Radio YouTube for videos about Fallout and other things. And check us out on Twitter, twitter.com/robotsradio.
You've been listening to a Robots Radio podcast. Smart shows for interesting people. Check out all the shows at robotsradio.net.